Wednesday here in New York. Don't know where you are in the world. My name is David Campany, and I'm the Managing Director of Programs at the International Centre of Photography, and I'm thrilled to welcome you here for what will, I'm sure, be a very interesting conversation with Mona Kuhn around her new book, a retrospective book, first retrospective book, which is titled Mona Kuhn Works, which is published by Thames and Hudson. If you've not secured a copy yet, and it's a very beautiful book, we have signed copies available in our ICP shop. And if you use the code bookevent10, bookevent one word, uppercase 10, the number 10, 10, you can receive 10% discount. Mona is joining us from the West Coast, California, and she has kindly and bravely let me choose the images that we will discuss today. So she doesn't know what's coming. Just that'll keep us all on our toes. Now, as always, at ICP programs, you can access closed captioning. So if you want live text to appear on the screen, you can do that. If you go to the menu bar at the bottom of the screen and you can select show subtitles. And as you saw in the opening credits, we've got a range of exciting online courses, workshops, public programs this season, all taking place online. You can browse the links in the chat to explore all the opportunities and programming happening this spring. This Friday, you can join us virtually at the Civilian Theatre for an evening of musical performances and monologues inspired by the photographer Akra Shep's images of Black Lives Matter supporters taken over the last year. The performance will be followed by a conversation with Akra on the work. Now, before we begin, I just want to give a proper introduction to Mona Kuhn, so I'll read a brief bio. She's best known for her large-scale photographs of the human form and for a string of pretty amazing books over the years. For the past 2 decades, she's lived in Los Angeles, and where she's been working and showing steadily, featured in exhibitions internationally and in many private collections. Her first book, just titled Photographs, was debuted by Steidl, the German publisher, in 2004, and that was followed by Evidence, then Native, the Bordeaux Series, Private, She Disappeared into Complete Silence, and more. She's also published the monograph Bushes and Succulents, and has been published, which was published by Stanley Barker Editions in London. That had a debut at the Jeux de Paume in Paris in 2019. The forthcoming publication, 835 King's Road, will be published and released by Steidl in the fall. She's currently an independent scholar at the Getty Research Institute, Los Angeles, and occasionally Mona teaches at UCLA and at the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena. So, welcome, Mona. Are you here? Hello. Now, the last time I saw you in the real world, I think it was on a rather sweaty dance floor in Paris.
I think so too. I think what was it? Silencio.
Oof, yes, David Lynch's club. Those were the days. How have you been since?
I hope they come back.
Yeah, they will. They will eventually. Well, look, congratulations on this book. It's completely beautiful. And it is the first survey of everything, pretty much, and we'll get to that soon enough. Now, I know you've done a number of talks recently, so I suggested that I put the slides together.
Yes.
And you've not seen anything of what I've.
So I have not seen anything of what you're gonna show, but I feel completely ready to engage in this conversation.
Right.
And also, like you just said, to be a little bit like walking on my toes. It's kind of fun.
Should be fun. Should be fun. Now, it's an extraordinary thing. By coincidence, we both published books with Thames and Hudson this year. I did a book called On Photographs. Obviously, they're completely lovely to work with, and it's a beautiful thing. But it is your first look back, really, as far as I can tell. How was that as a process?
Well, it was really interesting because I don't think it would have been possible, honestly, without the pandemic. I'm always looking forward to new projects. I am working on 2 or 3 new series. But when Andrew Seneger reached out to me, we met during Paris Photo 2019. And then right after that, he said, well, I got the approvals from Thames and Hudson, let's move forward with it. I was a little bit in panic because I had a huge year ahead. 2020 there was a lot of things going to happen, and I didn't know how exactly to bring time to the retrospective, in a way that is really well done, in a way that you open all of those not just my folders, but files and correspondence. Like I work with people that I keep my friendships all along. Yes. So for me to open this Pandora's box is not just looking at images. Remember when you were a teenager and a song came up and you remember exactly everything about that summer?
Yes.
So it was a little bit like that. But once the pandemic hit, in a bizarre way, it actually stopped everything and allowed me the time that it's needed to really sit and take a moment, give the time to all of those special circumstances that made this possible, and honor those moments, honor the people that I photograph, go over editing. I had the help of some people because they're all my friends, they're people that I care. So sometimes it's hard for me, what's a great image of someone I care about, and what's an image that has metaphors in the world of the arts. So all of that was possible, and also working with the writers, people that under other circumstances would have written, maybe they wouldn't have time. If they had time, they would have like a quick time for it. And suddenly there we were with all the time we had. So we were able to engage on much deeper conversations and put a lot of more thought into it.
That's interesting. So it turned out to be quite a luxury in a way then, that time.
Yeah. Well, the biggest luxury, I have to tell you, during 2020, I was in fear that at some point Thames and Hudson was going to cancel it. So being on my toes has always been part of being an artist.
Well, I always think that books are never real until they're real, until you finally get one in your hand. I had one in my hand the other day, and at ICP, and it's a beautiful thing. And you love to pay very close attention to the form of books, and you work with publishers and editors who love to do that too. Now, I'm showing you this partly because you've done a number of books with Stidle.
Yes.
But also because that's where we met. Now, this is the library at the top floor of the publisher Stidle, famous publisher in Germany, little tiny town with a long history of publishing called Göttingen. And I was there to work on a book, and you were there to work on a book. And that's run by Gerhard Stidle, and there he is looking like a Wes Anderson character in this white overall.
It looks so good. Did you take that picture?
No, I couldn't find any that I took. I actually had to find this one online today.
This one's a good one.
He's quite handsome in his own way. But anyway, what happens is, if you're working on a book at Stidle, you sit in this library and you wait to be called by Gerhard and that's where we met. So we were, and you were already a veteran. You'd already done a few books. So this is the order of your book. So we're up to
It's a bit of a long list.
So you were working on Private.
Right.
You were a bit of a star. And I'd arrived, and I was working on this book, which is based on a book about Walker Evans's work, For the Page, which I think interested Gerhard for other reasons. But there we were, sitting in a room together, just asking each other about why we were there and all of that. But then there were some very strange coincidences. So you told me you were working on this book, Private.
Right.
And you showed, this is the final book, but you were laying out images on the table and you were showing me some of these.
Right.
And you were asking me about the edit and the sequence of it, whether there were certain parts of it you were not so sure about.
Right.
I remember. And I was very intrigued by the pictures. But when we came to this one, I remember I kind of stepped back, partly because the woman on the right is so striking.
Right.
And I know it's shot out in the desert in California. And I said, this is very weird because she looks like someone in a movie I was watching last night. I don't know if you remember this, but
yes, I do.
I was
the three women from Robert Altman.
Yeah, so I was watching this movie, which and you make these very dreamlike pictures. You don't know exactly where they are or what state of mind they're in. And this film, this quality, and the older woman in the film, you know, has this kind of windswept hair. It's under a hat here. She's a mural painter. But it's all about these kind of interplays of these women, sometimes out in the desert. I know where you were anyway. And then there was another weird coincidence, because I had a copy of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, which I was reading because I was working on a project that I thought I was going to call A Handful of Dust, which we'll come to for a weird reason.
Right.
And I will show you fear in a handful of dust is a line from the T.S. Eliot. And then you pulled out of your bag
right
4 quartets. And I thought, what's going on here? There's just too many coincidences. And then I remember we worked on the edit a little bit. And then you made a confession. You said, I've got nobody to write the text for the book.
Yeah, last minute.
Could you do it? So I did end up writing a little text at the back of that book, which slightly recaps what I've just told you there. But I just thought we would lay that out on the table because it's a very interesting set of coincidences that allowed our paths to cross. Slides. So
and I think that there were a couple of thoughts, right? We're never working in one, you know, you and I think some of the creatives that I do know, we're never working just in one project, right? I was actually reading, I had already read the Wasteland, and I think that maybe the series Private had some undertones of it, where a bit of that wasteland, a little bit of that going into the desert, the bareness of the desert, and a little bit of abandoning your own spirituality or losing that and trying to reconnect with it. Mm-hmm. I like to say that people go into the desert as a nobody and they come back as a somebody. So there has been in history, if it's T.S. Eliot or if it is historical figures and icons, that repeats itself, not just in literature, but in philosophy quite a bit. Yeah. And then a way of coming out of it, because it does get a little deep. And I think I chose that image, Steidl and I chose that image Private, because it is at the end of the day a very private conversation, right? A little bit of where are you in your own thoughts about your own spirituality, about your mortality, about those kind of things. And a way of coming out of it in a way is to then find that inner connection again, which is what 4 quartets is about. Is about the 4 theologies or the 4 ways out of your dark sides. So in any way, that led to the work She Disappeared into Complete Silence, which is about a refracted figure in the desert, but more on a glowing, more on a shining from within aspect, which then turned out to be the cover of this retrospective book. But I almost feel that we crisscrossed, because then you went into A Handful of Dust, which I find to be such a phenomenal exhibition that you put together. And I'm very proud of being part of it, of course. Yeah,
we'll get to that, because there's a work of yours in that show and book, but it's probably your least likely image.
Right.
In a way, but we'll get to it. Now, you'll have to tell me about this, but I knew your books up to this point, and it looked like, oh wow, here was a photographer that had a real sense of a bunch of images being a project and being a book. Because you're such a confident image maker, I don't know, I think somehow I assumed you always knew exactly what you were doing and how a body of work would come together and then how that would turn into a book. Is it like that, or is it much
No,
more?
no, it's not. I mean, it's not really like that. I think that it takes confidence not to know.
Yeah.
And I don't know, and I'm okay with that. And I'm actually really interested on the unknowns. So for me to start a new series, I don't want to do what I have done before. It's really important for me to learn something along the way. I like to be intellectually challenged, instigated. So a way for me to go from one series to another is really to kind of tap into a more calm, quiet moment and start by imagining colors.
Right.
I usually, to me, the color, I think, you know, I like the work of Rothko quite a bit, for example. So I try to find 2 or 3 colors that I think have a certain resonance.
Oh, okay. That's interesting, because that itself is going to hold things together quite a bit, isn't it?
Exactly. So if I have the colors there, and then I have the area or the region, like you said earlier on, you don't really know where my images necessarily were taken. I can say that to you. I can say, oh, this is the Mojave Desert, or this is a naturist community in France, or this is outside of Joshua Tree National Park. But the idea when I'm working is not necessarily to document much. I don't really want to be too, I don't really want to show the body completely nude. At the same time, I don't want to necessarily show the location so sharply presented there. My idea is really to try to enter maybe someone's thoughts. Like when you're reading a really good book and it's not really describing the path to it, but describing what are you feeling as you're taking that path along.
Yeah, interesting. Now, what I've put together, Mona,
yeah,
until we get
I like your selection so far.
Good.
Oh, thank you.
Images from the book.
Yeah.
Sort of in order.
Okay.
So, and the book is quite careful to preserve the chronology of your work. It's sort of chapters.
Right.
I'm not giving you the chapters because we're just going to look at the images, but
yeah.
just so everyone knows that these are going really over the last 20 years, sort of towards the...
Yeah, the early black and whites that you showed there were around between 2000 and 2000, and actually around 1998 to 2002.
Okay.
The very first one that you showed is one that speaks to me quite a bit, the older lady, because that one, yeah, because I think people ask me, why do you photograph the nude? And I have to tell you, a little bit of it has to do with my grandparents. My grandparents are German. During the summertime, I would visit them. Mm-hmm. And if there was a minuscule amount of ray of light or sunshine, they would rush to the garden. They would get a newspaper. They would lay down on their sun lounging chairs, and they would get undressed. And then they would look at me and say, Mona, you know, take off your clothes because the sun is out and it's vitamin D. So to me, nudity came as a relationship with my grandparents. So to me, it was always very familiar. It was always very easy. It wasn't, and also the acceptance of their bodies. I never saw too much of a distinction there. I always kind of find it very familiar. Yeah. So this is not my grandmother, but when I found this couple and I photographed them, they asked me too, why are you interested in photographing us? Why are we interesting to you? When we age, people stop looking at us. We notice that we walk around and we're no longer a center of attention. And I remember having these deep conversations and realizing that the most interesting part of me is to learn about life when I'm photographing. Yeah. And Irene then told me, she said, Mona, I am for the first time 80 years old. I also don't know what it is to be 80. Like, you're asking me questions I don't know how to answer. Yeah. But that was the beauty of the moment. Right.
And what happens? You meet people or you know people and you just say, can we make some pictures together?
Yeah, so I actually don't like asking that question because I always feel that in a way, you know, I went to school during the 80s. and you had this photographer 70s, 80s who had long lenses and would ask people to, to undress and get naked. And I never wanted necessarily to be that person. But I wanted to photograph the nude. I was in love with photography being a fast medium and a modern medium. I never wanted to be a painter. I always wanted to be a photographer. But at the same time that I liked how fast it is, I also wanted to, in a way, stop it from being so fast.
Yes.
So for me, going towards the nude was a way of photographing the presence of us while we are alive in this moment in time, to register that, but register in a way that it's timeless, the way that is not the fashion of last month or so. Like, I was always very afraid of the time limit of photography.
Yes, yeah. You always have, I mean, it's interesting that we're looking at a deliberately sort of out of focus shot there, but you do have a way of framing and focusing that draws attention to the image, so that, it's never just a window. You're looking at a photographic vision somewhere. Right.
So what happened is that when you realize as a student, you are the one person that will be, doing nudes. And when I realized I'm in my body, and this is a mystery to me that I'm inside my body. So for me, that's where my thoughts are. And that's what I thought is some of an elemental quality of all of us being here. So I knew that I didn't want to photograph anyone in the studio, because in the studio, to me, it seems very contrived, and someone goes unrobes in front of the camera and sit at a stool, and then suddenly you're there in a cold environment. So I really wanted to find a place where people are maybe already in the nude, where I don't have to ask them to be in the nude, because I find that question to be a bit awkward myself. So I was introduced at the very beginning, 95, 96, I was introduced to a naturist community in France, where people will come. It's in a ecological area, far away from everything. At that time, there was no electricity, there were no cell phones. The places, the families that would go there, they would stay in places that are equalizer. Everyone stays in about the same simple environment. And it's really about being in contact with yourself and with nature again. If you want to be in the nude, you can. If you don't, you don't have to. There is no agendas. But because it's remote and because it's far away, and because it's summer, at some point, you no longer care about it.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit of, you abandon that idea that you need to be protecting yourself at all times. So it's a more unguarded environment. And of course, no one is waiting for a photographer to show up. That's the last thing you want there. But over time, and becoming more and more connected with that community, over time, I started photographing one person or another, showing them the prints. They would then show to their cousins or to their parents or to their best friends. And suddenly I started creating a certain community where people enjoy working with an artist, enjoy collaborating. I always presented myself in the nude to them, meaning they always know what's my artistic intention. They know, working with the nude, what's my vocabulary, what kind of things interest me, and I would also be very verbal about everything else that doesn't interest me. So there was a certain comfort level that kicked in, and I was able then to do those compositions, like you said, working with 3 people, creating a certain composition. I think then my German side kicks in, because I was using film, and this is a square format, it's a Hasselblad, it's a 6x6. We as bodies, we are rectangles. So a little bit of me would be like, how do I put 2-3 rectangles into a square using some sacred geometry where there is some kind of dynamic happening, and at the same time not overly sexualize it, because those are nudes.
Yes, yeah. So all of that is very precise, Mona. Does that mean you're being very precise with the people? Are you giving them micro instructions? What's happening?
No, I'm not doing micro instructions because I think that I would suffocate life doing that. So I think that, let's just put it this way. I think that I could have, let's just say 1,000 ideas, and someone else, if I'm collaborating with someone else, they might have 1,000 ideas, and together we can have 2,000 ideas. So the whole point is to collaborate, to observe, to see what they're doing naturally. And I might ask, hey, let's do this again tomorrow when the light is right. Or I might say, hey, what are you doing right now is fantastic. Just turn your head ever so slightly so the nose connects with the cheek. And I have my camera. Either it could be spontaneous and it could happen right then and there, or maybe I might see something that is gorgeous and we might want to revisit it the next day if they have the time. I work with people that are they're not models, so I also don't overly photograph them. I photograph 1 or 2 roles, that's it.
Oh wow, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, when I look at that one on the right, I mean, I think, you know, Caravaggio would be proud of that, the relation between the nose and the cheekbone and the light on the eye.
Right.
Quite amazing. And I'm thinking, okay, yeah, so was that micro instruction or luck or?
No, I don't do the micro instruction. I might have asked the person on the right side, her name is Roxanne. Okay. I might have asked Roxanne, you know, it's perfect what you're doing, but I would love to see your eyelash, a little bit more of the highlight of the eyelash. And I would love your nose just a tad to the right, to your right. Wow. And then she would do it. And then the image before and after might be really almost great, but this maybe because of my micro instruction became a little bit more formal. I mean, I am very classically trained, right? So I do bring the vocabulary in.
Now with a Hasselblad, generally speaking, you're looking downwards.
Right.
Unless you've got an eye level view on, but generally speaking, you're looking.
Yeah, generally speaking down, yeah.
Does that help? Because I'm sure that kind of slightly cuts you off from you're not staring at the person. They must be seeing like the top of your head.
Right, right. Down. Well, the one reason why I ended up using the Hasselblad, and that's the only camera I have used so far. If it's negatives or digital, that's the only one. Number one is because I'm a frustrated astronaut. I was born in '69, and I actually, and the Hasselblad was the camera I used in the moon. So that's as far as I will get to becoming my own personal astronaut. But on the side, aside from that, is also a medium-sized negative that you can handheld. So I don't want there to be equipment or tripod or reflectors between me and the people that I'm photographing.
It's all handheld?
Go ahead.
It's all handheld?
It's all handheld, all of the daylight. Actually, here you see a little bit of me. You see on the bottom right.
Oh, yeah.
You see a little bit of the shadow. My head is, pointing down inside the camera. I mean, I love the fact that you do have a little bit of me is very Brazilian. I was born and raised in Brazil. I like to say that I'm Brazilian on the weekends and German during the week. And when it comes to doing photography, I like there to be a very fluid, very informal, like an ambience where life and art comes together. Oh. But then once I am looking through the camera, I am very German and I make quick decisions so that I don't bother the models, the people collaborating with me. So I'm very fast when we are doing the photography, and I do, like I told you, 1 or 2 rows. And
do they get to see the pictures?
Yes, for sure. I don't like the practice of anyone signing model releases before we start photography. For me, it's really important that with or without the photography, or with or without the success of a possible photo shoot, that we keep the friendship, or we keep that really important relationship through a collaboration. Got it. So people often ask me, why are people so comfortable in your images? And to tell you the truth, I think it's because I give them a lot of confidence, I give them an environment that they can trust. And the part of trust is to say, you do not need to give me release to anything you don't like.
Sure.
So at the end of a photo of a shoot or so, I show them the images. I show them, I in a way, I expose to them my naked truth, where I show everything. I show those images where maybe I made a mistake on exposures, or where I failed, so to speak. But in failing, I become so human as well. And my work is about being human. So in that sense, if there is anything that they don't like, they can just tell me, and we don't need to even argue about it. I'm like, there's so much work anyway, we don't need to do it. To me, the friendship is the most important. Yeah. And until nowadays, there has been only one or another person that had a second thought about it. And they only had a second thought because one of them became a judge. So she thought it would not be so great.
Okay, that's interesting. Do you ever show them your past work?
Yeah, I show a little bit. It's always good to know that when you're doing nudes, I think that the common culture, what we are exposed nowadays, the pop culture of the day is too much internet, and it's too much, nudity, and the nudity that I call a bit more gratuitous, so to speak.
Yes.
So it is important when I say, hey, I'm a fine art photographer working with the nude, I like to show them where my mind is at and what my references are at. Like when you mentioned, one of the things that I love doing is going to the Getty Research Institute here in Los Angeles. When you mentioned Caravaggio, I spent 3 months studying the different kind of shadows between Caravaggio, Vermeer, and another one I'm forgetting now, but because they use the shadows in completely different ways, and they showed and they revealed certain things in those shadows as well. So my thoughts are not necessarily on the nude of a magazine. My thoughts are on nudes that have maybe a more longer history, longer vocabulary.
Interesting. Because it's a difficult thing to balance, isn't it? Being kind of aware of the history of images without making photographs that are too referential to the past, and
right.
It's to do with how you absorb your influences, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think in a way, because I do like the arts in general. If I wasn't a photographer, maybe I would be a scholar of the arts or so, because I really enjoy it. So it is true that most of my ideas are probably index cards of things that I have seen.
Right.
And that is exactly the reason why I wouldn't want to impose that. I want to engage in a collaboration where someone is more spontaneous, where we can freshen up those ideas. Maybe the moment that I click in the camera is the moment that I think it worked out because of my references. But at the same time, I'm allowing new air into that dialogue.
Oh, sure. There's you do very interesting. It's interesting you mentioned like combinations of color and how that might form a body of work. But there's always a movement in the projects between the warmer colors and the cooler colors, and things like flesh and yellows and oranges, and then greens and blues of water and plants and
right.
When you're making shots like this one or this one, are you seeing them as counterpoints to the nude?
Well, yes, the other thing that happened is I started working the very beginning of it. I was working in a naturist community where people are unguarded, where they were trusting me. When they trusted me to photograph them, I also had to impose on myself a certain condition that was important for me. And that condition was not to show everything that I see in front of me, to, in a way, using selective focus, show just what I think is okay to share with the outside world. I did not want it to be a show and tell kind of work. So in that sense, I started in a place where I had already a lot of people willing to collaborate and pose. But when I came to the desert, or when I came to Venice in Italy, the conditions were different, and I didn't want to bring a cookie cutter, like I have to now continue to have this large amount of willing people in the nude. I wanted to really understand the culture and understand the environment of the place. And then from there, learning about, it gives me an opportunity to learn about Venice, to learn about what it is, and then use all of that information and transfer that in some kind of a visual story. So when it was in Venice, the waters of Venice, the aqua was super important.
Yeah.
So in these images, it's funny that you're bringing it up. It might be interesting to know that in one of the days that I wasn't photographing a person, then I arranged with a friend to go in a boat. And I was actually hanging out of the boat trying to make those images.
With the Hasselblad?
Yes. And it wasn't, well, it had a casing, of course, for the water. But my arm, I didn't realize my arm wasn't long enough to touch the water. So the person, a friend of mine who is Italian, he's like, no problem. I have a rope here. We can tie your legs into the boat and you can hang a little further out. And that's exactly how those water images came about. Interesting.
You shoot in lots of different kinds of light, everything from very, very harsh desert light to this work. Is this the Bordeaux?
Yeah, this is the Bordeaux series. So the Bordeaux series was, I wanted it to be a very traditional, so to speak, portraiture series. Almost, I was a little bit inspired on this farmer, Michael, this farmer, photographing, being in a way a small town photographer, photographing a certain community, photographing your in a way, in this case, what I consider to be my extended family. And I wanted it to be a reductive series where it's one chair, one room. Right. And again, here I maybe photograph again one row, because how much more can you do in a room? Yeah. And do you have reflectors or anything, or is it just you and? Yeah. In this case, it was a room that had one of those French doors to the outside. Okay. I was actually on the outside looking into this room. The room was a very small room, really. Mm-hmm. And behind me, I had a white reflector. Got it. So just to open up a bit those shadows. And I also wanted it to be very classical. When it comes to talking about colors, I was thinking, portraiture to me is so traditional. Mm-hmm. So in a way, I wanted to do the black and white, and then just one color. And that color, I wanted it to be a color that would bring life into it, that has a range of emotion, like life and death and passions and fear. And that was that, deeper tone of red, like the Bordeaux color. And that's the cloth you see behind. Yeah. A little bit like your sweater. Yeah. And I was able then to photograph different people. It was about photographing a whole range of group of people from a different age group, but also a cross-section of the French. I mean, this is outside of Bordeaux. Mm-hmm. You have the Bordeaux University. I was able to work with people around that area. You had French Algerians, French Moroccans, Muslim French, like everyone came together, and it was a way of bringing them together. Now, that being said, this image was a lot more in focus than any of my other images. It was very much descriptive. You have the person in front, and you can, as a viewer, you can take a look at her, and you allow, it's a lot more revealing, and your eyes go through it, and you can really examine the body of a beautiful older lady. But what we did in terms of challenging how much of it gets to be seen is that I never printed them. I never really printed them larger than maybe what would have been a hand sketch. So they're like 15 by 15 images.
Okay, okay. It's now that you say that about the focus on this one, it does almost seem like more of a document or a kind of study, whereas
Right.
these feel.
But you see, look at the, you know, it's almost generational. If you go back to that woman, the older lady, the way she holds her, the way she crosses her foot in the back, and the way she holds her hand, or the elegance of, you know, even though she has arthritis and so on, but you have this elegance of gesture. And in her eyes, I mean, I know her, so I cannot stop thinking of her, but, you know, the gracefulness in aging.
You're extremely attentive to the kind of photographic rendition of skin.
Right.
And I've got a sort of technical question, because
Yeah.
you come into photography at a point where you're shooting on film, and film was always very, very nuanced, very, very subtle in what it captured. But for a long time with color photography, things got compromised in the darkroom. So color, you know, C41 printing, and also Cibachrome from transparency. You couldn't control things very much. You couldn't really regulate saturation or contrast or local changes, and everything just lacked the subtlety that was there in the negative. That's what everybody complained about for decades.
Right.
I'm presuming that you shoot on negative and then scan, and then you've got very, very good control in the printing. Would that be right?
Yes. So in the very beginning, you're completely right about that. In the very beginning, I started with black and white, and that was, in a way, my early step and an easy step into the body, because I was photographing details of it, and I was able to use the black and white in the darkroom and really control it as much as I wanted. Yes. At some point, we made that switch, right, in color photography. I think I started my color photography possibly 2002. Okay. And in 2002, that is when I was a lot more acquainted with Photoshop. I was a lot more acquainted with digital printing. Right. I liked at the very beginning, and still nowadays I use light jets. I like the digital. I like the digital part that is still on photographic paper. Oh. So I like the emotion of a C print. I'm not a inkjet type of person at all, especially because we are talking about skin rendering, and I like the continuous tone of a light jet. But it is true that at the moment that I decided I now can step a little bit, I can step back and show more of my environment, coincided with the moment where color photography became, you know, all those tools became more available to the photographers. And it is true that I spent quite some time making sure that the tonalities are calmed down, that they are a bit, like I like to say, that they're tamed, because it is true that it can be, photography can be very much a document, right? So it can be very saturated, or can be very precise in its colors. And I don't like it to be that documentary like. I like it to be a little bit more in our thoughts.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, but I don't really change, I don't really reconstruct things. I do broad changes to it, just to calm the images a bit.
Yeah. So these are from private.
Yeah, so those are from private, where I went into the Mojave Desert. And again, this is a great example of, there's nobody in the desert. You drive for hours before you see somebody. So of course, the majority of this series are landscapes. And I also got into a little bit more of the mystical, like you showed early on that bird. I got into this mystical. This is a territory that is not ours, so to speak. And maybe the other forms of life, like the animals, they have a whole history. They're so important in the Native American history, and they have such a presence there. So just like I wanted to bring the water into Venice, or into the Venice work, I also wanted to bring maybe the mysticism of the animals, or the mysticism of those environments into this work.
I remember writing in the essay, the book, about what happens to, I think I quoted Georgia O'Keeffe, I can't remember now, but I think it was O'Keeffe that had noticed that when you stand in the desert, because it's so bright,
right,
in the daytime, everything's your irises really contract. So
right,
the sharpest your vision is ever going to get, and everything is like super vivid from your fingernails to the horizon, like everything
right.
feels. But I remember looking at the pictures and thinking, oh, this is interesting. Oops, because you're doing things like this which are very photographic, to have a shallow focus in a space where you're expecting, the eye would do something different. The eye would behave differently. Yeah.
So it happened, incorporating the landscapes into the work came also early on when I went to Brazil. I went to this huge, that's where I learned certain things that, will make sense with this image you have up now. Where I went to Brazil, I photographed inside the rainforest. I spent quite some time in it. Inside the rainforest, you have these huge canopies. They're very, very tall. You have, what you don't see on images is that you have a tremendous amount of birds singing, or insects. You have this cathedral feeling with the dappled light coming in, and with this incredible choir of animals. And I really attempted to photograph this grandiosity of it. I came back and I realized that all my images failed because I was trying to incorporate too much. It's something you cannot grab in one frame.
Yeah.
All of that grandiosity. And so I realized that I needed to photograph the forest, just like I started the work a little bit more like the early black and white, to really focus on the detail, on the vulnerability, on the messages, on the metaphors of it. And when it came to the desert work, I had learned my lessons about it. And someone could come to this waterfall. This is a waterfall inside a Navajo Nation territory, which has been, there is a geological dislocation here. Is a very large river coming down, and you have multiple waterfalls. I was standing at the edge of it, where you see in the foreground is out of focus, little upside down V shape, is just a rock in front. And then I wanted to highlight that one waterfall right in front of us. I wanted that for multiple reasons. A little bit of it is just these nuances of flash tonality, so to speak, but also this grandiosity. But I knew that I couldn't, if I had it all sharp, I wouldn't have anything.
Yeah.
So it was a way of guiding the viewer to where I was going as well. But I always liked a little bit that the edges of the frame and playing with the corners. I mean, the Hasselblad is very precise about that, but a lot of it came to, and I have to make an arc here, a lot of it came by observing Diebenkorn, the Ocean Park series.
Oh, the painter, yeah.
The paintings, because he would always bring those lines towards the edges of the frame. And I always thought that was so interesting. They had a really big exhibition at SF MoMA when I was still at the Art Institute there. And I think that observing those series is where I actually learned composition.
Interesting. I should just say here, if anyone in the audience has got questions or thoughts, you can put them into the Q&A. We'll get to them soon enough. We might be a little bit behind, so we'll have to push on.
Yeah, I have time.
Yeah. there are fantastic little details like this in private. Which
so this one is, for example, an image where in actuality, it's two cardboards leaning on the front of a storefront, forgotten. They're forgotten in time, and they had been stained. But it has this sharpness of the desert light that you talk about. It has this beautiful black shape of the first cardboard shadow on the second cardboard. And to me, that is a landscape, almost Asian.
Yeah.
So there is a whole, to me, that's like an ink work or a landscape or layers of it, which to me, photography was always about the metaphors that you bring in. Nice image you brought there.
Yeah, this is, now you have a change of direction here. This is from a project which I know is a book. I've seen a couple of prints, but I know it's a book with this slightly hilarious title.
Yes.
Bushes,
yeah.
Bushes and Succulents.
Yes.
The combination of these sort of solarized looking
body parts,
and then cacti.
No, not cacti, but succulents.
Succulents. But
There's a distinction there. Someone has joked to me and said you should do the cacti next.
That would be bushes and no, I won't say it.
Let's not go there. But so bushes and succulents, of course, there is a twist there to the title. It was a little bit of a comment. I had been doing a lot of works already, maybe 18 years of doing works. And eventually during those interviews, someone would say, do you consider yourself a feminist or not? What's your take? And to be honest, I have always had an interest in the humanities. So I don't really position myself as being a feminist or not, but I thought that there was this moment in time where I could contribute maybe something to that long conversation. Mm-hmm. And in doing so, I had to think about a body of work that I was saving to do when I'm really old and I can only reach out to my backyard or so. I always wanted to do some botanicals. And I started thinking about it. Oh, is that what's expected of women, to be doing botanicals or illustrations or Victorian little drawings that you put on some kind of laundry or the kitchen? And those thoughts started growing in my mind. And I suddenly thought, you know what, maybe it's about time that I do my own botanicals, and I will do that with a twist. And I will do that also in honor of the women that made it possible for me to do what I'm doing nowadays, and possibly also encouraging women that will become great artists in the future. So what I did was a little bit of a Trump oil, where it is a game of illusion. So I photographed, so the bushes is what you can see, and I photographed the body parts almost as a take from that Auguste Colbert painting L'Origine du Monde, which was actually painted in a much more revealing way. And I wanted to pick up the conversation from that point of view, photograph the women up close. I didn't want it to be full nude. I wanted, and I wanted to just focus on that area that is related to the origin. So to me, that was really important. Now, because they have the bush, you don't see anything, you don't see their private parts, but you see the contour of their bodies. And I also abstracted it further by solarizing it. But it is the succulents where you have a lot more of those innuendos. And I had to revisit, I brushed up again on my readings on Georgia O'Keeffe. And it turns out that when she was doing those beautiful, huge paintings of flowers, Stiglitz came to her studio in New Mexico and said, Georgia, those are beautiful, but you're not going to exhibit them, are you? So it was this conversation where Georgia O'Keeffe, during her life, we all know that flowers are the sexual elements of the plants. So there's not much to talk about there. But Georgia O'Keeffe never, ever acknowledged that. And I don't know if she wasn't able to, or it wasn't the time, or whatever it was. She always skated around that question. And in my work, and nowadays I'm able to say and be what I wanted to be. The women that I photographed, they were here in Los Angeles. It was one of the first time I actually photographed in the studio, because I wanted this very I wanted it to be in a just about the bushes and not too much in the background. So we wanted it to be isolated, and they understood the concept. They found it to be refreshing. They find it to be interesting, and everyone that participated in a way where they really felt that this conversation or this game of illusion was called for. Now, the problem was that it came out in 2018, and it kind of coincided with the Me Too movement. And to be honest, none of the galleries wanted to show it, even though I'm a woman, and even though I was able to, in a very distinguished way, contribute to that feminist conversation. Nonetheless, everyone was walking on eggs. Now,
is it because
now we're revisiting it, and there's interest again on the work, but it's kind of interesting how we have gone through some self-censoring process.
I think people sometimes have a problem with ambiguity. So they want to, I've noticed this particularly in art galleries where there are images that people feel ambiguous about. They quickly run away to the artist's statement, like to make sure that it's coming from a good place.
Right.
They don't quite trust themselves to respond to what's in front of them, and to think about why it might be making them feel ambiguous, or why they don't like it, or why it's difficult, or
but isn't that it? But that's where the conversation starts in the arts, right? Yeah. So this the Solarized Images came as a little bit as an honor to Lee Miller, because Man Ray is very much known for the solarizations. He had a commercial studio in Paris, in New York. He had all the solarizations are very experimental. They don't happen easily. It's like a souffle that you take out of the oven, and most of them collapse. So it's a hard process, and it's very unexpected. You don't know the results. You cannot control it so easily. But it was Lee Miller's little accident in the darkroom, turning on the light switch, that actually led to solarization. So I wanted that. And also we included a wonderful text from Gwendolyn Brooks, that I got permission from her estate to include. And Gwendolyn Brooks, again, was a woman that received the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry in the 50s, but at that time that she received, it was also censored. So this series was it's very close to my heart, in the sense that it kind of enveloped all of those thoughts into one series.
And then your work gets very kind of architectural, refracted.
Well, it gets refracted in the sense that, I think the one interesting thing about doing the retrospective is that for the first time, I actually also stepped out of myself and looked at myself. And it's like, and I actually even asked, what the heck am I doing? So I was able to look at the continuity of the work, and I then suddenly realized, and I think maybe now I can even mention it, I suddenly realized that I have worked with the body because I am inside of my own body, and that's the mystery in my life. But in working with the body, I have found multiple ways of hiding the body as I am working with the body. So if it is solarization, or if it is selective focus, or if it is layers of reflections. And then I think that around the time that I did this series, I really, I had been in Los Angeles for more time. I was a lot more aware of the light artists, or Larry Bell, and really was a lot more into embracing light, just light itself. And I was also trying to understand, what is our role if I am working with the figure? We no longer we no longer, our body language nowadays is not to sit relaxed on a chair and wait for a painter to paint you. Like those moments no longer happen. We are psychologically and philosophically speaking, we are more refracted. Our presence is more refracted. And finding this glass and mirror house in the middle of the desert was the perfect space for me. In a way, it's a continuation of my own camera, because the Hasselblad is glass and mirror. So it was a set that was a continuation of that, and I was able to bring together the human, the presence, the scale, a little bit of the architecture, although architecture was not really my main focus. My main focus was to distill that idea of thought, sure. Like that you create a certain environment, but it's just your thoughts, really. And then the landscape. So I guess I titled it, She Disappeared into Complete Silence, but the she in this sentence is the person which disappears into the light, wow. But also the horizon line of the landscape. And then you showed an image there that is all reflected on Mylar. Also, in a way, the image itself disappearing. Mm-hmm. So I was able to work a little bit more with those concepts. I worked with someone, Jacinta. She has been in my work for quite many years. I know her really, really well. I consider her my sister. We spent time in that place. We would sleep. We would really consciously. She studied art and photography, and we were able together to really zone out and really tap into a certain unconscious as well, which is such a luxury. A lot of many times, if you think about, you're in New York City. If you would be doing a photo shoot in New York City, you would schedule a time, you will show up at that time, and then maybe you have an hour and a half, and then everyone has to run.
Mona, how do you balance the kind of the communing with the person, the being with the person, with the kind of separation you have to concentrate on making a really good image?
Well, I don't know. It feels natural to me. That's a really good question. I just do it. I think that a little bit of it is to know each other. I do have a certain charisma. People feel comfortable with me, and we were trying different things. Jacinta, in this case, was wonderful working with her because she was able to detach herself from the images. So the same way that I have this fluid in and out between being a friend or between being the photographer, like the same way that I float between those two roles, I think that Jacinta also floated in the role of posing for me and being the model. And at the same time, we would at night, this was shot digitally, that's why you see that is a rectangular shape.
Got it.
At night, we were able for the first time to download those images and look at it. And we would look at it critically. We would look at it in a completely different way. We would say, did we abstract enough? Should we redo some of them? Is it okay? In this case, we wanted the shadow we wanted her to be dressed in the shadow. We didn't want to be an open shadow. So we really collaborated in that sense.
That was a tour through the book. Now I had to put this one in because this picture has has a funny story. So when we were both there at Stidle, and you showed me this one, and I got very interested in it. And you said, "Why are you interested in that one?" And I said, "I don't know." Well, I said, "I'm working on this crazy project. I don't know if it's going to happen or not." Called a handful of dust. But I thought it was an amazing picture when you showed it to me.
Right.
And so it's from the book, and it's a Google Earth picture shot off your computer screen. Hence my zooming in, so you can actually see that your image has the kind of grid of the screen.
Right.
And it's this place called, is it California City? I can't remember.
Yeah, So it's California City, and I was in the middle of, I was in the middle of doing the private series. I went to California City, and while I was there, so what you're seeing here is an image from above, and you see the streets of this city that was never built, but you see already the cul-de-sacs, and you see the little streets in and out of it as if it was like planned. I went there and I walked on those streets, and there was nothing I could photograph. The soul of what I wanted to say was really from above. And what I wanted to say, it was this carcass, really. It was this ruins in reverse, that idea that before it was even built, it became a ruin before it existed.
So it was a planned city, a speculative planned city that never happened, but that all the roads were laid out, but then the roads are now disappearing back into the desert.
Right.
It never made it to be a city. Anyway. It
never made it, and it really in a way it is. I agree with you that it's a very unlike Mona Kuhn kind of photo, but at the same time, when we talked about the some of the water images or some of the nature images, in a way, it's also important to give a breather in between all these images with bodies. I don't want to be gratuitous. I don't want to just photograph a lot of people. That, to me, there is a lot of, to me, there is all this life that didn't come to fruition in it. So the absence at times is really super important as well.
And it ended up in that show, which ended up, well, it's in Taiwan at the moment, that picture.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned the sequencing and the kind of bouncing off images of the nudes with plants or architecture or landscapes. You sent me these pictures. There's just a couple of these, which is interesting just in terms of
I think that's a little bit the part of the editing. So this is towards the end. At the beginning of it, I always make prints. Nowadays, everyone, and you're taught in school and so on, everyone can do a lot of the editing on softwares, and it's fine. And it works well maybe for a commercial job, but for me, it doesn't work well on my fine art, because I am not able to have 200 or 300 images up at the same time. Like, I still need to be able to look at it. So I come back, I always ask for the proofs. I like to plug them on the board. And at the beginning, it's very messy. There's many of them. And every day, the editing for me takes maybe 4-6 months. And every day I go in front of this board and I take a few down. So maybe there were some images that were very striking and I thought it was a sure great shot. But then after 2-3 weeks, the metaphors are over. It doesn't last any longer. It doesn't have a quiet opening of further ideas happening. So what happened is that every day I come and take many off until halfway through the edit, I then see what's happening and I have the totality of it in front of me, which is always very helpful for me. And then I start rearranging them as if I would start sentences.
Oh, interesting.
So that's when I start sentences. I also see from one sentence to another, are we missing something there? Or are we maybe even being too literal? Can we be a little bit more abstracted? So that's when I start. So this is maybe probably more towards the end, where it's becoming more organized again.
And then when I look at this,
yeah,
I'm seeing you with that sort of attention to the image going all the way through to the proofs.
Right.
The book, because of course the technologies that make a book are not the same as the technologies that make a print. But you've done a lot of books now, so you've
yeah, this was the first. I have done a lot of books, and with all the books with Steidl, I was there at the printing press, because to me it's like the birth of a child. Like, I want to be there. It's emotional, it's great, is what I want to do. So to me, it's a very special moment. Then, even with Stanley Barker, we did meet. We did all the editing from abroad, but we met for the printing press. And when the Thames and Hudson book came along, the entire editing, the conversations, everything was on Zoom because it was 2020, and the proofs were being produced. They were being the color proofs were being corrected in London, but then they were printed in New York, and then they were shipped to Los Angeles for me to make those notes, to then go to the printing press in China.
Oh, wow.
And it was very it was strange for me, because I felt that I wasn't controlling anything. At the same time, I was working with such a great group of professionals that towards the end of it, they didn't tell me anything. We didn't even have a maquette. We didn't have a little maquette of the book at all, like a mock-up. But I still remember the day that the doorbell rang. I went outside, there was a package. I didn't even know what the package was. I opened it, and it was the book.
Wow.
Printed.
Ready.
Like I was like, what, already? And it was heavy. And it was the very first time that I actually had that physical contact with it. And I have to say, there's nothing I would have changed. I mean, I really working with Jeannie and with the professionals at Thames and Hudson. They did a phenomenal job, which is not easy when it comes to skin tonalities. Yeah.
Now, I'm aware that we're a little past time, because of
course we are.
And there's so much to talk about. So that's the end of the presentation. We will switch to some questions here, because there are some very interesting ones. Terry says, even in your story, nudity was in direct relation to connecting with the earth and elements, soaking up sun. Do you relate nudity to being of the earth? Are you thinking about the relationship between the body and the environment?
Yeah, well, I think of nudity as being a human being on planet Earth, in that sense that we are alive. I mean, it is a very big question. For example, David, you and I happen to be alive around the same time. So we happen to have a friendship, a relationship. And what would it be if you or I were born 10 years apart? We would not have met. So to me, the human presence is really interesting, and the fabric of psychology, the fabric of conversations, of what happens when we are together is really interesting, the relationships that we build. But I think that the nudity came to me as an elemental part of that, as a really more stripped of all the superfluous, not related to status symbols, just what it is. And a little bit of it too, because I was introduced to it to my grandparents. It was very easy for me. It was always felt very familiar. To me, nudity is also freedom. Right.
Yeah, there's something utopian about it in there.
Yeah.
Must be. Someone asked, sorry, your name's not come up as anonymous. Are you in the nude when you're taking nude photos in naturist communities?
So in the naturist communities, I like to say that I have my flip-flop on.
Okay, good answer.
Because I always want to be part of that community. It would be really bizarre for me. I don't believe on photographing the other as another. Either I'm part of it and we're all part of this, or not. So I never really wanted to enter a scenario where I'm photographing people as someone I am not.
Yeah. Are you ever really in the dark room, or in the traditional sense of a dark room? Yeah. Or is it all digital? Or
yeah, so variations of it. At times it's digital, at times the black and whites are all gelatin silver prints. The solarized work was a humbling experience. I went back to the darkroom. Nothing worked for about 10 days before I got my first good print. The chemicals are different, the papers are different. And it was humbling, but I'm happy I did it. So I'm very comfortable in and out. And I love the darkroom, you know. That's what made me fall in love with photography was, you know, I think with most of the photographers, when you see that image coming up. So it's nice to revisit.
It is. Someone asked, do you see your portraits as an elevation of your subjects or as a revelation of to your viewers of the value and beauty that is there, or both?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, so I play very carefully with the word revelation, right? That's when I create all these layers of things so that I don't overly reveal out of a respect to my subject, but also out of trying to bring a slightly different vocabulary to photography, to nudes in photography. So that is there. So my revelation, I walk a very fine line. The elevation, I would like to think so, yes, because I would like, you know, when I got interested in the arts, I was much younger. It was even before photography. I was a teenager. I lived in São Paulo in Brazil. It's a Latin country. It's a very social country. At the very beginning, I was not such a social person as a teenager. I was actually very quiet. And my mother would go out for lunches and see friends. And I would always ask her, can you just drop me off at the museum and come pick me up 4 hours later? And in doing so, you know, she would feel, you know, this 14-year-old, she's safe because inside the museum, there's guards and whatever, nothing's going to happen to her. And for me, it was heaven. And in the 80s, 84, 85, museums were empty.
They were. It wasn't the big entertainment industry it is now, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was. There was no Blockbuster. There was none of those things. And in that emptiness, my first relationship to the arts was a quiet relationship, was staring at it, looking at it. But the thing that I liked the most as a teenager was to search in the galleries by myself, what kind of work of art would give me a certain levitation moment. Yeah. Like that thrill of seeing something in front of you that from an artist you don't know 300 years ago or so, but that something still resonates in you. And why does it resonate? I mean, that to me is what brought me, that is something I'm still here to solve. Like that is my journey. And in a sense, I like the levitation that I felt. And I think that I have always been in a more hopeful side of wanting people to I don't know, to connect in that soul level.
Albert asks, if you could meet one artist from the past, who would it be?
Oh, that's a great, I mean, just one. Oh, well, right now we talked about so many artists, so it's kind of hard because I have the immediacy of the names we just mentioned.
We'll remember as soon as we finish this.
I'll circle back.
Okay, good. Did you choose a particular paper for this book?
Yes. So this book, we had two kinds of papers, and I'm very grateful to Andrew Saniger at Thames and Hudson, because that's something a bit of a luxury when it comes to decisions on the printing press and with the publisher. So we had we had a thicker paper that is really great to reproduce photographs, coded. Mm-hmm. And then we had a more a softer, slightly more translucent paper, slightly more creamy for the texts.
It's interesting. I often think about this, particularly with skin, because, you know, essentially a photographic image doesn't have a surface. Certainly doesn't have a surface the way a painting has a surface. It has the surface of whatever you print it on, doesn't it? So
right.
So the qualities one ends up lending skin because of the paper and because of the finish on the paper. That's quite a delicate thing to be thinking about, I imagine.
Right.
Tricky.
Yeah, it's tricky. And I have done the private book is done on a paper that is it's actually a German paper, is only available in Germany, is an organic paper that has a lot of egg yolk.
Wow. Oh,
So it has more of that creaminess, but it was also more, it was perfect for the desert. It was perfect for that for that tonality that I was going after. While this one, we used a little bit more of a neutral white because we had so many series.
Sure.
So we needed something that goes well with all of them.
Yeah, yeah. Could you talk about your lighting when shooting at night?
Okay, so I'm glad that you brought this up, whoever that person is, because the moment that we talked about me just doing natural light was the moment David was showing those two images that were done at night. So I wanted to get back to that. Yes. So I really work with natural light. I observe, I see what's going on. I try to, if need be, fix a little bit here and there, but very minimally. And I don't, most of the early work does not have a light at all other than the sun, natural light. But at night, there was a summer where it was very, very hot. It was so hot. It was a heat wave going through France. It was so hot that we couldn't even sleep at night. No one could do anything. And people were wandering around, visiting each other, a little bit like thinking, oh my God, what can we do? Like, it's so hot. And I said, well, let's do some photography, of course. So I needed light. And it was, so what we did, I kid you not, I had a battery charger that we connected to one little single IKEA light. And that's how those images were shot.
Ah, interesting. So you still keep it pretty minimal, nothing too elaborate.
Well, yeah, because I didn't have it and I needed to have a little bit of a MacGyver moment there.
Fair enough.
I didn't have any light. I don't travel with lights. I do use lighting for commercial jobs. A lot of times creative directors come to me and say, can you reproduce what you do? And of course, then suddenly we're in New York instead of in France or whatever it is. So I have to know how to reproduce it in a way that is also sustainable or that it is reliable for the moment.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't realized that. Wow.
Yeah.
Suzanne says, oh gosh, this is complicated. Please share your mindset in pairing images together. For example, a dead bird body flanked by trees.
Yeah. Okay, so the dead bird, so that book was about embracing death. That book was about mortality. That book was about that private conversation, and it was about spirituality. So, which I usually don't actually say it, but now I am. So in the sense, that bird is the only fold out and is the most important one in the entire book. And what I did, I put a bird that is known for the region, which I photographed at the Natural History Museum here in Los Angeles. And then I had the sides being basically just an image of the tree, the branches of the tree. And it was about that certain electricity. It was about life, even though it was the image of a dead bird. Yeah.
Well, I will take one last question because this is the longest I've ever let a talk run over, Mona. I'm usually
I'm honored.
I'm usually very disciplined about these things. Your work seems to value the concept behind the images quite a bit. Do you think a good photograph requires this? Or should? Can it exist for its visual sake? Yeah, just say a bit about the relationship between ideas and the images. And
yeah, well, here's what it is. Photography is a 2D piece of paper. And how can I put my entire life, my entire thoughts into it? I put slivers of it. I put elements of it. My relationship with the people that I photograph is about life, is about, I spend, days hanging out before we photograph anything. Those days are important for me because there are certain clues from that I might bring, that might educate myself. It's like I don't believe in photographing anything that you don't know. So I need to know my subjects. I need to know who they are. I need to be able to create certain metaphors that then I can transfer into a 2D visual element.
It's interesting what Maria says, because I think it's got something to do with what happens, once a body of work is done. the world seems to expect a photographer to be able to articulate it, and in a way it gets post-conceptualized, doesn't it?
Right.
You make the work a little bit intuitively. You don't really know what it is till it's done. Then it has to get kind of packaged up and presented to the world.
Right.
And it looked like you had that concept at the start, but really, really that's come out of the work, I would imagine.
Yeah, but the other thing is, just like children, so to speak, we raise them to the world, right? So once a series is done, I cannot be always there, nor should I, nor do you want the artist to constantly be justifying or talking about the work. It should hold its own ground, or if it does fail, then there is a conversation about that. But you know, the reason why I'm here doing the conversation with David without knowing what David is going to show is because I don't control that. So it is good for, you know, I allow the work to have its own interpretation, and I actually enjoy to hear what people think. You know, as image makers, we do know that psychologically speaking, the viewer always project their life, their experience, their upbringing into images. That is, I am aware of those things. And you know, when I'm doing bushes and succulents or certain other things, I am pushing the viewer a bit as well. And without hesitation, so to speak. So, but that is what is exciting about image making. Now, when you talk about pairing the two images, I do like the communication that happen. You know, if we have two paired here as a form of a book, just for easiness. So for easiness, if it's a form of a book, the interpretation, what happens is that there's a third image that is in the viewer's brain.
Oh, yeah.
And I think when I do the books and we do those pairings are not firm. They're not supposed to be necessarily always together, but when they do come together, they are saying something I want to communicate.
Interesting. Good place to end. Well, it's an extraordinary book that looks back over everything. I hope I selected reasonably representative pictures.
Oh, you did great. Thank you for this chance.
That was very, very generous of you. It was just a brilliant insight into your work and how you've been doing it all this time. As we said, you can order the book through ICP, and if you use that code BOOKEVENT10, you get a 10% discount and a signed copy. Mona, thank you very much. Thanks for all the questions.
And I wanted to say, this year, the pandemic year was difficult. I do have an exhibition in New York at Hauck Gallery. It is an online exhibition. Go take a look, because we're all trying new things, and I would love a feedback.
Great. Wonderful. Thanks for joining us, Mona. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Take care. Bye.